Welcome to Conversations from the Barn at Everwood Farmstead. These are casual chats with visiting artists. Creaky barn, bugs, and all. Enjoy. Hey, welcome to Conversations from the Barn. This is Bill Underwood. I'm here with Chris Everett, of course, and our artist on retreat this week is Kristin Dieng. Hey, Kristin, welcome.
Hi, Bill. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
So, full disclosure, let's get this out on the table.
This is a good idea.
Kristin is our niece. We are blessed to have a very big committee that reviews all of our artist retreat applications. And of course, with Kristin, neither Chris nor I reviewed her application. We had it in the hands of another committee member, and she was selected on her own merit. In fact, if I might so disclose, you applied in the prior year, and you did not make the cut. So.
Right, I make sure I tell people that as well.
Yeah, right. But anyway, it's lovely to have you here this week.
Thank you.
Sadly, we weren't here for most of the week, so it's been you and Oaks kind of holding down the fort. Talk about your week.
Yeah, that's a hard one where to start.
It always is.
Well, it's kind of, I was just talking to Oakley recently, and so that's what's in my head right now. But I was saying how, you come to this retreat with who you are. It's kind of the whole thing, if you run away from something, you bring yourself with, so you can't really. And so I think I had this idea of like working on one project and then fun projects too. But in my head, I was thinking you kind of have to like show that you're worthy of getting accepted. So I think instead of relaxing and just retreating, I was more like, I have to show that I made something as an artist. And I think it took me until yesterday where I started to settle in and go, I could have done this differently. Mm-hmm. Like if I had started, because I started to play last night and was kind of like, this feels really good. I wish I had started the week this way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of changed.
And self-imposed pressure.
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Yep.
Because that's actually one of the beauties people tell us about this retreat process is we actually don't have any metrics, if you will, in terms of what you have to finish the week with. So but as an artist, do you find that you're imposing that pressure on yourself frequently from a productivity standpoint, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by you bring yourself, you bring all of your baggage and the expectations that you have for yourself. And as much as you try to put that baggage down, it still comes with you. And so, yeah, I knew I was doing it, and I relaxed probably more than I normally would, but I wish I had started more sooner.
Something switched in you last night that you kind of felt more a sense of play. Is that something you could carry back with you?
Yeah, I'm hoping. It's kind of funny because it's, we were having a conversation about safety, and somehow having you guys on the property, like it was like, I like working really late at night. And so I was working late at night, but very uneasy, even though there's no reason for that. And so once you were here, it was like, I can work until midnight or later. I'm okay. And so then it was just more of a relaxing, but yeah, I definitely started kind of playing right at the end, and I have to be mindful of it because I could see if I go home, immediately jumping back into the like produce versus like play, and so it has to be conscious. Yeah.
Share with our audience what your artwork is.
So I'm a glass artist. That's a whole debate on what I am.
You get to define it.
Yeah, so I do mosaics, but most people's perception of mosaics is opaque, ceramic, craft-like more. And I mostly work in stained glass, but I don't do traditional stained glass. So I don't work with lead or copper. And so I don't really fit in either community very well. And so when I explain what I do, I always have to explain it. And it's kind of nice because I actually form relationships with artists in both communities. But it's also a little lonely every once in a while. Yeah. And I mostly do geometric designs and landscapes, and sometimes I mix them.
And so what did you work on this week?
So I had a piece of glass that I've been saving for a couple of years. A very quick backstory is that in the last 5 years, I would say more than 60% of the stained glass companies in the United States had to close down. And therefore, more than half of the stained glass stores in the United States had to close down. So the variety of stained glass available to people is drastically reduced. And so people are being very careful about the art glass that they use that is no longer being made. And so this particular sheet is one of them. It's funny, when I showed it on social media, one of my followers said right away, like, this is a collector's piece of glass, you know that? And I said, yeah, but I want to use it. So I've been saving it, and it resembles, to me, the back of a hunched over man spirit. And I've been calling it a ghoul, but if you look at the definition, it's not quite right. That's not really what I'm trying to convey. But I just saw him walking through this forest of tons of branches with a lantern. And I was telling Bill and Chris that in my mind, I read a book, and there was a character called the Harbinger of Death, a Claire North book. And the Harbinger of Death visits things that die. But it's not just people. It's languages and cultures and mindsets, places. And so in my mind, I was seeing this spirit walking through the forest with a lantern, looking for things that need to end, things that should go away, that don't benefit us individually, culturally, just humanity, like what needs to be ended. And so that was kind of my idea of him walking through the forest.
I bet that was fun to create in a barn in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was perhaps
Fun for some.
not the right theme for making me feel safe.
Right.
And you guys should know that apparently they haven't ever had an alarm go off. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I did very late at night one night, and no one knows why the alarm went off.
Still
so that,
not sure what the alarm is.
yeah. So clearly something, was relating to that design or something, or me. Yeah.
You were conjuring something.
I was. I think you think of it as the ancestors and positive. That scares me, conjuring something. But yeah.
For fans of Stranger Things, that when I first saw the piece, it immediately brought me back to, I think, season 2 of it. Just the shape of it is very reminiscent of a bit of Stranger Things. So I like the way you two are headed, actually, more so than the way I originally saw it. But
It is a fascinating piece of glass.
yeah, it is beautiful. And now the lantern, because it's not a finished piece yet, but
Not
now
yet,
that makes
yeah.
sense what that was. I was going to ask you about that, but. And have you been documenting, like, in your social media post? Are there photos of it so far? So if people want to see this piece of glass that you're talking about.
Yep, there are photos so far. I was going to post another one today of kind of where I'm at the end of the retreat. It really just needs the sky and some of the landscaping left to do. But that becomes a bit complex because there's a full moon, and so the question is, how do you, in glass, try to make light go through and yet still have this feeling of this dark forest? And the same with the lantern. How do you show some light kind of coming off of it? How do you cut the glass? How do you shape it? How do you place it to give the effect that I want? Yep.
I'm really fascinated at how you work with glass. I don't know that I've ever seen it. It's, traditionally, especially like with the lead and the metal and all that, it's very geometric and kind of hard-edged. And you approach it in such an organic kind of way, you kind of paint with glass in some ways.
Yeah, that's how I describe it. I often say, I've seen this when I teach classes. I'll have artists that are traditional stained glass artists that come to my classes, and I can see that their brain thinks in a puzzle, in pieces, and I haven't seen any, maybe one only be able to put that mindset down. So even when they're doing mosaics, like they're still drawing pieces and cutting and putting them together. Whereas I don't like puzzles. And so it's like you said, it's more organic. People often ask if I draw ahead of time, and I never do. And when I do, I feel really constrained. I don't enjoy it. I've done realistic images, and it felt like paint by numbers, but with glass. I didn't feel like I owned it. It wasn't my design. It wasn't an idea. I think for a lot of my work, I wanted to convey an idea. And so to do that, you can't just take an image. You have to create the idea. So yeah, and I cut as I go. So I cut a piece and I put it down, and I cut a piece and I put it down. So I just kind of watch it. And glass breaks often on its own in ways that you don't want it to. And so often, you have a piece and you want it to go a certain way, and it just doesn't do that. And so you just have to accept it and place it as it is. And so what I have in my head is never, ever what it ends up in. It resembles the idea, but it comes into its own.
I love watercolor because of the relationship. You can't control it, You're in relationship with the water and the ink, and it's going to do what it's going to do, and you have intention, but it's a dance. And you're talking about that same thing with a really hard, rigid material, but you have that same kind of flow in kind of response back and forth.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something you have to learn. When I teach classes, people, they'll say, can you cut a piece for me? And I can do it in seconds. And they always go, oh my God, how'd you do it that fast? Well, I've been doing it for 15 years. So it's just like painting. You get to a point that you know how to hold your tools and use them. And it just becomes like an extension of yourself more. But, you still have that. It's not totally in your control, which is nice, because if it reduces the maybe OCD type tendencies, the control tendencies a little bit, where you just have to accept it sometimes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you don't draw to begin with. Do you take inspiration from photos, or do you just like mentally capture images in your head and then remember it and try to recreate it?
Yeah, so more often than not, I just enjoy following a lot of artists, and I see art and I get an idea in my head. And it's funny because I remember somebody saying, what is inspiration? And I thought that's what it is. It's you see something that already exists and it prompts or sparks a new idea. So you're not copying, but whatever you saw or heard creates this inspiration. And so I have just crazy amounts of lists of all these ideas that when I see things, I just write all these ideas down. I've been told I really should draw them in a book, but I don't really enjoy it. And believe it or not, the ideas actually stay in my head.
Through words?
No, if I write the words, the image still stays in my head. I found that I remember spaces. And so when I was 14, I went to Europe. And I can walk through every building and palace that I visited on that trip in my head. And I can do that with almost everywhere I've ever been. I just travel through spaces. And so that's kind of what these images are in my head. It's almost like a place that I can see, and then I'm trying to put it into the art. And it's interesting because a friend of mine that I mosaic with a lot, she likes to do realistic images, and she takes photographs, her own photographs, and then she puts it under, glass or wood on top of wood, and she recreates the exact image. And she is not judgmental of herself. She's very go with the flow, and so her technical skills are advancing at a rapid speed. She's so good at this. Where I'm very careful about my designs and trying to have it express what I want it to express. But when I explain to her, she'll say, well, what are you creating? And I'll lay out the whole image, and she'll just say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm like, no, I just literally described this whole scene for you. And she goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so we were learning, it's how we create is totally different. I have this idea in my head, and that's what I'm trying to make, whereas she likes to make something very detailed and specific. Yeah.
I know you do commission work. for our clients, do they come to you with the idea, or how does that work?
I've been extremely resistant to commissions.
Okay.
Because for me, it's about expressing these places in my head. And so there's just a constraint when somebody is asking you to make something. It's just not mine. And if I was dependent on it for an income, I would have to find a way to balance that.
Yeah.
But for me, so much of my history is that I have chronic migraines, and it was bad enough that I spent 5 years in bed. And when I was in bed, every once in a while I would get an hour or 3 hours of good time, and I would create art. So for me, those 3 hours were rare and really valuable. And so I did not want to spend those very few hours doing something that wasn't expressing who I was. I lost so much of who I was when I was in bed, and so it was like I needed those moments to find myself and show people I'm still here. And so whenever I would get commissions, it just wasn't that. Like, I was happy to it was great to see the joy that when you created the idea that they had, that when they received it, they were so grateful, and it was beautiful, but it wasn't me. And I think I needed my art to express me when I was really sick. And that still plays into it, because it's very hard when you have a chronic illness that's unpredictable to set timelines. And so I think I've been told that, if you just tell people, like, if you love my art, it might take 3 months, it might take 1 month. If you're okay with that, great. It's again a self-imposed, like, I am not comfortable in that place right now. I would hope that eventually I would be comfortable saying that to people. So I've taken them sometimes.
Yeah.
And particularly if they like what I do and they're just asking me to make some version of what I already love creating, then, like, for example, I had this one guy, Dave. Dave was between jobs and said he really needed inspiration in his office. He was looking at the neighbors and didn't want to look at the neighbor's house. And so he wanted something really beautiful hanging in the window that would give him great energy and inspire him while he was looking for a new job. And so he saw some of my geometric arches, and he asked me to do an arch that was 2 designs hanging side by side. And it was an off-center arch of diamonds. And, we carefully did all of this, and we agreed on the colors, and sure enough, I started doing it, and it wasn't what he had in his head.
Yeah.
You think, and I even drew examples, and I thought, like, it's a drawing, it's what it is. You agreed to the drawing. No, it was still not what was in his head. But then he looked at it, and a couple of days later, he said, "No, I actually really like what you did. Like, I think that's the right way to go." And so now that's great. We have this great relationship. We talk to each other from time to time. He texts me photos when the light is really beautiful in his office. He showed me photos when they unpacked it, they're like what it was like receiving it. And he got married in his house. And so there are these photos. So there's something there eventually, but I'm careful about it right now.
Yeah.
While you've been here, have you been able to get out on the property, walk? Have you experienced nature while you've been here?
Yeah, one of the first things I did was I ended up going for a walk. It's funny because in my head I thought, I'm gonna, wake up early in the morning and take early morning walks and see the light. And I love mornings, so it was a great idea. It just didn't happen. I'm a night person.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking more evening walks, but I was saying to Bill that I really like the light in the evening because it's not a full-on light. It's like green and yellow light that just goes through leaves and through trees. And I'm really, most of my art is about light. It's not just the design, it's about the way that light interacts with the design. It's a bit of a side jaunt, but for me, I want my art to be interactive. I don't want it to just be a static image. And so when it hangs in windows and interacts with light, the art changes. Like it looks one way in the morning. It looks a different way in the afternoon, in the evening, if there's a sun setting or sun rising behind it. If you change your position,
Winter, summer.
Winter, summer, which if it's in the east windows, west windows. Some people have done skylights and they take photos of the colorful reflections of them walking through the reflections. So it's an interactive thing. So for me, I think it was the walks were doing that a little bit. It's more just walking through and seeing the way that the light touches the path and the trees differently. But I still, again, brought me to this, so I was skittish. And so, I'd hear animals and it would throw me off. And one evening, I don't know what it was. It's like the size of a very large cat. It was like bigger than a cat, but smaller than a dog. And I don't know what it is, but it ran down the path in front of me. So it's kind of one of those like, oh, I love nature, but
But keep your distance.
But keep your distance. I'm not really sure about that. But it's wonderful. And I like that there is more than one path so that you can make choices. I think I wouldn't enjoy one path that I'm just following. Yeah. And so different times, the different times I've walked out there, I've taken different paths. Yep.
We have a tradition in wrapping up our podcast that we ask everyone the same question. And the question is, how have you experienced beauty today?
That's a hard do. Does everyone have a super long pause when you ask?
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah, this you'll have to cut. I'll just start crying. I think I would guess other people say there's a certain finding acceptance in knowing yourself a little bit, in knowing that I thought I would come here and just be like, wow, this is fantastic. It's quiet and so peaceful. And the first day I was working, there was no internet for, I think, 3.5 hours, and I didn't have any music. And I was not good. Like, I couldn't create. It just made me super agitated. I just, hated it. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a long week. And so once I got my music back, I was good to go. But I kind of learned, I don't love total silence. I might at moments, but it's kind of when I choose it. I didn't have a choice at that time. That was the difference. I'm sure with time, you can learn to be more relaxed and accepting. But yeah, it's just interesting where you see where you think you might be, and then you actually see who you really are. And you might want to change over time, but it's an acceptance of this is where I'm at right now. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity.
This is a great chat.
We loved having you here this week, and we're fans of your artwork too. We'll be excited to see how this piece finishes, what it turns into.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that I do some play art and share that as well.
Bring it home.
I will. I have a whole bin of glass that was devoted to that for this week, so I still have it.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for saying yes to this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Conversations from the Barn at Everwood Farmstead.